Welcome to What Matters, a podcast that takes a look inward at unique experiences, upward for divine direction, and outward at God's activity in the world. I'm Michelle Funk, your host, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. I want to remind you to subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. And I'm so excited today to introduce you to Susie Davis, who was part of our Inspired for Life conference. So some of you might know her through that, and the rest of us are going to get to know her even further. And I just want to say hello and welcome, Susie. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
We are delighted to have you with us today. I'm just going to let you introduce yourself a little bit and just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're at, what you have going on, and then we'll just enjoy some conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I'm an author, I'm an encourager, and I am a mentor. I love mentoring women. I'm from Austin, Texas, born and raised here. I met my husband here, and we started a church here in the Austin area over, gracious, I think now 28 years ago. And we still are there. And most importantly, we have 3 kids that we adore who've married 3 other kids that we adore. And I have 2 grandsons. I'm all about family. And you should probably know that I'm helplessly addicted to McDonald's coffee. I'm no Starbucks for me. I'm lowbrow. Like I'll go for that $1.09 McDonald's coffee. I'm also addicted to pink geraniums. I love creek walking. I love being outside. I love horseback riding. And I really see a lot of who God is in nature. And when you probably will find me out creek walking or at the barn or just in the garden. And I've been doing a lot of that because I think we've all had a lot of stress this last year. So I've been grateful that the things that I love to do are still available, even though some of the ways that I love exercising my gift in the church haven't been as easily available because I love having women into my home, even having dinner and diving deep. And that's just not something that that's been on a fast, I guess I would say. I haven't been able to do as much of that. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. You mentioned author. I got to hold up your beautiful, beautiful book. We just have so enjoyed this as a gift. It's titled The Grace Guide. And this is from a book that you kind of spoke from during the conference a little bit, as well as just sharing some wonderful stories. So just want to remind everybody that this is something that we it's so pretty too. Just if you don't have this on your own nightstand, it'll look great on everybody else's. So it's such a lovely book. So I wanted you to know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we loved that. You keep grace as kind of a top priority or as an emphasis of what you do. It sounds like grace is really important to you. And so I just kind of wanted to come back to that a little bit. That sounds like that's part of your experience, this idea of God's grace. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. This morning, I woke up and sometimes when I wake up first thing in the morning, when my mind is really clear, I feel like I hear from God. And what I heard this morning when I woke up was, I actually wrote it down in my journal, but it was like grace for grief. And I would say that in this season, there are so many people that are grieving things. And I even mentioned a couple of things that I'm missing as a result of this last year, just the opportunity to gather with people. But today I had a conversation with a woman who, an older woman, she's probably in her 50s, who was talking about some things that had happened to her in the last year in her business and her personal life. And all of it was a result of just the changes that have happened in the last year. And as I was talking to her, that idea again came up of grace for grief. And I think, whatever season of life you're in, we do need grace over it. But in this particular season, collectively, I just feel like there's a lot of us who have felt losses. I haven't been able to be with my parents. I'll social distance, so I've missed their hugs. And just other things like that, wearing a mask and things like that are necessary right now, but still have created losses in our life. And I just thought today when I felt like I heard from God, I was like, you know what? You need to have grace for yourself during this season of grief. And maybe there's somebody listening who's just like, wow, like tears are rolling down their cheeks right now because they're realizing that, they're tired, they're weary. Maybe it's you. You're right here listening and you're like, I'm tired and I'm weary. And I want to give you the message that God gave me. There's grace for that. Like there's a time to be tender with yourself and a time to be gentle during this season of grief for all of us collectively.
Yes. Oh, I could not agree more. The grief that has come from this past year, it's a year ago, right about now, that
Yeah.
everything started to change, just one thing after another. And with every single cancellation and just unprecedented announcement and news story, there was, I think, grief upon grief upon grief upon grief. And yeah, so this idea of the grace that we need, not only to give ourselves, but one another, but I think it starts just like you're saying, being tender with ourselves, being gentle with ourselves, because it's still heavy right now.
Yeah. Well, and I'll even share just a small example from my own life. I was, a friend of mine reached out, a friend of mine who I was supposed to have an event this last year with at her place, Amy Hannon, who's a delight. And if you don't follow her, you should on social. She's a wonderful person. Anyway, she had reached out and she was asking about getting some copies of the Grace Guide for her store. And I was finding the information for her and I just started crying and I didn't know why I was crying. And there was just a little pocket of grief over having this book, the Grace Guide come out. It came out this time last year, right? In the middle of the start of the pandemic. And that's a very small example. But for me in my life with God, it was big because I spent time dreaming about that book and then writing the book and then kind of it coming out at a time that was so crazy and confusing, which is kind of a wah-wah, and I processed it some when it happened, but then again, when my friend reached out, I didn't realize that it kind of made me sad. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's just like, I was like, why am I upset? And then I was like, oh, because it wasn't as I expected.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that God was surprised by it, but there's everybody, I can say with 100% assurance, has had situations, obviously some much more traumatic than that, but there's grace. There's grace for your sadness. There's grace for the lost expectation. There's just grace in all of it. And I have never felt more grateful that God promised his presence in all of our lives, in all of the situations. Yeah. And that itself is just such grace.
Yeah, absolutely. Our church is in the midst of a sermon series, and we were just talking about the story from the Gospel of Mark that Jesus was in the storm,
Yes.
in the boat, when the storm blew up on the Sea of Galilee. And our faith doesn't teach us that there will be no storms. It teaches us Jesus will be in the boat with us when we encounter them. And I think during this past year, maybe there have been some beautiful glimpses of God being present and working through people as he beautifully does, that maybe I, for one, have clung to help me, kind of just keep going and keep going and keep going. And those have been some beautiful lessons and wonderful things that, just as a reminder, as you said, God is so faithful. And
yes.
yeah. You, I know that you do a lot with mentoring, And I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit of that. I think mentoring must certainly be another instrument of grace, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it really started organically with me when my kids were in high school. My son is our oldest, and he would invite his friends over, and some of his, the girls would come over and sit across the counter from me while I was making pizza or whatever. And I would just start asking questions, just wanting to know about their lives and where they were with God. And it happened with my next child, who's a girl. She would bring her friends over, and same thing. And they started calling me Mama Suze. And um, so that's when I realized, like, oh, I'm a spiritual mother too, to others, not just my own children. And it just kept growing and growing. And then when my girls, we have three. Our youngest is a daughter too. But when they all went off to college, I ended up writing short, little, like on Instagram stuff, dear daughters, like just little notes, just reminders. And that's when I started the podcast, Dear Daughters. And then I ended up writing a book, Dear Daughters. So it really started organically for me. It started with the people who were nearest by. It started with me asking questions, which is what I love to do at the table. And it just started with me listening for where God is in other people's lives. And it's, I've never been trained to be a mentor. I never was officially mentored. And you don't have to be available.
Yeah.
And so that's really how it started. And I have now been meeting with a spiritual director for probably 4 years. And it was the first time I treated myself to having a mentor relationship on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that my relationship with her has seen me through some confusing times, some hard times, some good times. But we check in monthly. And actually, the phone call I mentioned, I was talking to someone today about some things in her life. And one of the things she said was, I just really feel like I need a mentor. And I think everybody deserves a mentor.
Mm.
And I think the other thing is that you don't have to be like certified to become a mentor.
Yeah.
If you've done some things wrong in your life and you've learned from them, then you're a good teacher to somebody else. And if you've done some things right and it's worked out well, then you're a good teacher for somebody else. It just takes looking at who's around you and inviting them into conversations and questions and sharing a little bit of life. And so that's really how it started for me. And I just feel, like, for example, I have two girls, my daughters. I want them to tell me everything.
Yeah.
I know that's not the best thing. They need another spiritual woman in their life, because I'm always going to take their side in their marriage if they're having a squabble with their husbands. And a wise woman wants her children surrounded by other wise women. And so that's just how I feel about it. I have a real strong desire to see women in relationships with other women that are intentionally devoted to spiritual growth.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Does that happen at all at your church? You mentioned your church, and what did
Right.
you say, 28 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my, I bet you've seen some pretty amazing things at your church. Tell us a little bit about your church.
We started our church, Austin Christian Fellowship. Like I said, it'll be 28 years this year. So, and it's a non-denominational church right here in Austin, Texas. My husband's the lead teacher and senior pastor. And so, and yeah, we do have a mentoring program that our discipleship gal is in charge of. And so that's another way. I mean, I think it can be organic, like I described, or there can be a situation, hopefully at your y'all's church or whatever, any church, where you can get into a situation where you can be introduced to a mentor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love our church. I want you to come if you're in the Austin area. I would love for you to come and be a part.
Yeah.
And so I feel grateful. I say, I was called into ministry when I was 16 years old. I had no idea this is what it would look like. But we like to say that we get ministry is hard. It can be very hard and very tiring, but you also get a front seat to glory. You get a front seat to baptism and life change and hearing those inside stories of the way that God is helping someone love him more. And so we're really grateful that that's what God asked us to do. And I pray that we're faithful to the end.
Yeah, yeah. Are you meeting in person yet? Are you looking forward to being able to do that soon with your church, or
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Are you what?
meeting in person yet?
Oh, meeting in
Yes.
person. Yes, we started meeting in person. We have a couple services. We started meeting in person, I guess, a couple months ago.
Oh, good.
And then we have an online church too, which we had, online messages, but it changed pretty dramatically. I'm sure y'all did too.
Yes.
Over the last year. So yes, we have an online service too. That's great.
I love that. I think all of our churches have learned a lot and have
Oh,
changed accordingly. And yeah, it's been such an incredible experience to be a part of that. And again, just the, faithfulness, God keeps showing up, of course. And
right.
so, yeah,
I
thank
love
goodness.
how nimble the church has been. When I say
Yeah.
church, I mean Big C, to pivot and figure things out just in a fraction of a second. And I've just been so proud of, I'm sure you have teams of people who were doing one job and then they had to pivot and do another job.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful for all the people who are, working in the church, whether they're volunteers or they're paid, to just get the message of God out and to make sure that there's a place where people can continue to feel that connection with God and others, even if it's in an online space. It's been beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So you also mentioned being outdoors and your horses. Tell us more about that.
So I've been riding since I was I rode for when I was a child, and then I couldn't anymore just because it didn't work out. And I ended up, then I got married and started having kids. And for my 30th birthday, my husband gave me a riding lesson, singular. He was
Okay.
like, I want you to have a riding lesson. And it was so great. And we knew someone had a friend who had a barn. So I went out there and then years and years later, I never stopped riding. Then my girls started riding with me. And he was like, what? Somehow that one lesson turned into a pretty big commitment. But I ride Hunter Jumper and I love it. Right now I'm riding a pony named Moo. He's hilarious and cute. He's a paint. But yeah, I've been riding since I was 30, and that's like, I don't know, gracious, I'm 57. So I've been riding a long time. It's where I just get away, and I have a barn family out there that I adore, and I'm able to be, I say this, I'm able to just be me and not be, the pastor's wife or Susie, just me, the girl at the barn riding Moo. And it's so delightful. But I feel like those kinds of things are really important in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I know that God takes pleasure in the things that we take pleasure in, that he gives us in our hobbies and stuff like that. That's one of my favorite things to ask when I mentor people is what's their hobby? And often they're blank faced. And I think that, that's a real important piece of who we are in our whole person. So what's your hobby?
Yeah. Gosh, I have several. So,
good.
Yeah. What has really fed me over the course of this year has been, I have some things that are silly too, but certainly reading.
Yes.
A big hobby of mine.
Nice.
Just simple exercise, walking.
Yeah.
My husband and I, we are now bike riders. We're going to also figure out how to do kayaks. We have 2 of those in our possession now, so we'll give those a try. So just getting outside and breathing a little hard and moving around just in simple ways. I consider that a hobby, but also just kind of something that's real necessary. Playing cards is another fun hobby we do as a family, and have these fun, maybe a little bit competitive, card games that we try to still be nice to one another, maybe. So, and one of my favorite hobbies I don't do anymore, that I used to cross stitch. It was just so
Oh,
lovely and soothing and wonderful. And then life just got busy. That was set aside. So I'm going to get back to that one day.
I love that. I used to cross stitch too. That's fun. That makes me want to do that. That
I
is
know.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, hobbies are good. And,
Yeah, they are. And I feel like like I said, sometimes they're really fun because they reflect, a part of who God made us to be. Like,
mhm.
why do I love horses so much? I don't know, but that's just who God made me to be. I love riding. I want to ride till I'm 75. Like, I want you to always find me with my McDonald's coffee at the barn on a horse, no matter how old I am. But I think that, and I talked about this in the Grace God a lot, but loving who God made you to be, and that picture of yourself, your baby self. I talk about that in the book, and your young self, kind of recovering that,
Yeah.
and not always trying to go do all the things, or what does success look like.
Mhm.
I think success looks like, honestly, I said this, I want to be found faithful.
Mhm.
I want to say to God, I love this beautiful life you've given me. I want to be grateful,
Yeah.
and I want to live a whole life, like, not just, you know, find me as a worker. I want to
Mhm.
be a daughter, to God. I want to be a daughter to my parents. I want to be a
Mhm.
sister to my sister. And so it's like looking at yourself holistically. What does that look like? And a lot of times, I found when I speak to women is they need to reevaluate that.
Mhm.
They're, or they get stuck in one role, like being a mother. And then
Mhm.
when the kids leave, they
Mhm.
have no idea who they are or what they want to do.
Yeah.
And so I kind of encourage that, just that holistic look at who we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Right. And some of that leads us to, figuring out how do we share our faith with the world, or how do we put our faith into action and be part of what God is doing, in our midst. And I think that adds to that completeness of our life experience.
Absolutely. And sharing your story, like, even like I talked about the parts where you made mistakes, but like sharing your story in a real way with other people, and how God has saved you, healed you, how
Yeah.
he gives you everyday joy. Like, what does that look like? So,
Yeah.
yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Well, I thought we might just also kind of talk a little bit about the other unprecedented recent thing that happened in your great state and how you're doing. Wow, the loss of power certainly made a big, huge impact. I'm so sorry you had to, for
Yeah, no,
everybody who's had to experience that.
right. So we had a huge snowstorm.
Hmm.
If you watched the news a couple weeks back, and we had a loss of power, and we had loss of water a lot, but in our community. So we still are kind of rebuilding from that.
Mm.
But the really cool thing is, and something you mentioned early on, is we it was very, very, very endearing to see how people took care of each other during that time.
Yeah.
And there was even a story here in Central Texas of a young girl who was delivering groceries to, someone who had gotten a grocery delivery. And she went down the driveway, and it had been so icy that she was worried even her car was going to hit the house. Anyway, but she got out to deliver the groceries. And when she got there, the couple said, "You can't leave because the weather is so horrible. There's no way. You need to stay here until it gets better." Having no idea it would be like 5 to 6 days before it got better.
Yeah.
But it's just the story of how this couple took in this girl who was delivering groceries, stayed with them the whole time. They made dinner together. And, when I think about what, I just got goosebumps, but like when I think about what we're supposed to be in the world,
Yeah.
it's that kind of person, like, that just takes people in, strangers in, um, and lives life with them.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of that in the Austin area, in Central Texas. Just story on story of, I have one friend who took in 12 people dogs included. Not a dog person, but took in the dogs, because they were important.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was, a lot of stories like that, sharing food and water and just take care of each other.
Yeah.
We got an opportunity to do that. And we're on the backside of recovering and getting, houses repaired. And we're taking a deep breath and trying to, to make sure that we take care of ourselves in this recovery. But anyway, yeah, it was quite a deal for Austin and this area in Texas.
Yes, I'm so glad you are, like you said, on the backside of that, and was witness to some nice things happening, even in the midst of that complete chaos. Oh my. So, well, I think that's kind of part of your story. The overall, message is that there are moments of tenderness and grace to have and to give, to care for ourselves as we care for others. And we can grow into kind of this full experience of life through not only those things, through our faith, through our church family, through our hobbies, through the things that we do, in the way that we care for one another and treat one another. And I just love all of that. And then to connect, either like you mentioned at the very beginning, in an organic way, just something that happens, you find a connection with someone and build upon that and invest in that, or to orchestrate that a little bit, at least by providing opportunities for others to be able to do that. So I love all the things that you are doing, Susie Davis, especially your
Oh,
McDonald's coffee while you're out at the barn. That picture is going to stay with me for a while. You
well,
must be close to both.
I love the picture of you learning to kayak. That's the one I'm going to
Yeah.
hold on to.
We'll see how that goes. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for being part of the conference, for being part of this podcast. Thank you for your gift of writing. I want to encourage you to continue that. And for your words about mentoring, I think are really important to us as well. So thank you for
Well,
all you do. So hang tight. I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers for now and to let you know that that's what matters. And we are so glad that you joined us today. Be sure that you subscribe so that once again you'll be able to take part in our upcoming episodes. We provide those for you once a week. And so thank you for taking part today. I'm Michelle Funk, your host, saying goodbye for now. So you must live close to a McDonald's and a barn.
there's two McDonald's equidistance apart, 10
Perfect.
minutes. And the
Perfect.
barn is like another 5 minutes that way. So it's like, yeah, I can loop in, get my coffee, go to the barn. It's all good.
That is the best.
It actually is the best. You're right.
Yeah. I didn't ask, but I hope your kids.